Hey guys, this is Ken from Vertibox, and you're watching another episode of the Marvel Heroes Leveling Guide. On this episode, we're going to take a look at Jean Grey, otherwise known as the Phoenix. Like with all our leveling guides, we're going to give you a broad overview of the character, we're going to let you know what skills are worth investing in, what skills are worth avoiding, and generally give you a sense of how that character plays in the game. Jean's main role in the game is a ranged AoE character, and out of all of the ranged AoE characters I've played in this game, she's probably the best one. Jean Grey offers the player a very high-risk, high-reward playstyle, and she's basically the game's glass cannon if you choose to build her a certain way. Like a lot of ranged AoE characters in Marvel Heroes, she's really not designed to take down bosses. Even her basic attacks are actually designed to take down trash mobs more efficiently. Jean also makes a pretty good support character because she has all sorts of crowd control abilities like stuns, slows, and fears, and generally things that you would expect a telepath to have. Jean has a lot of different builds available to her. If you want to play her very dangerous and recklessly but do a lot more DPS, well, you can do that, and if you want to play her a little bit more safe, then you can do that too. My only real big disappointment with her is that she doesn't have a single target damage spec at all. Every single spec she has revolves around dealing massive AoE damage. It just depends on how you want to go about it. The last thing I want to point out is that Jean was designed to be the Phoenix. There's just no build worth pursuing where she isn't the Phoenix. If you had this mental image where Jean was picking up enemies with her mind and ramming them into things, then I think you're going to be kind of disappointed because that's not really how she plays. But if you wanted to play as the Phoenix, then I think she's going to be a total blast to play, because in this mode she just completely destroys trash mobs. It's a hell of a lot of fun. I only wish that the developers gave her some kind of single target damage spec, because as is, I wouldn't recommend her as a solo character. She's definitely much better in groups. And with that, let's get into the skill trees. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently in this guide, as we're going to focus on Jean's Phoenix skill tree first. The first skill is Phoenix Transformation, and this allows Jean to turn into the Phoenix. Now this skill is just bonkers, because it gives Jean a huge damage increase to all of her attacks. In addition to that, it permanently makes her character move a lot faster, so while she doesn't have a charge ability like other characters do for quite some time, you will make that up by moving pretty fast all the way through the content. Like a lot of other characters in Marvel Heroes, Jean has a secondary resource called Phoenix Force, and as you kill enemies or as you take damage, you'll get more points into Phoenix Force. To transform into the Phoenix, you need at least 30 points, and to keep it going, it's going to drain 1 Phoenix Force point per second. It's important to always be on the move and constantly kill enemies to keep your Phoenix power up. Now I know this sounds like a lot of hassle, and you might be thinking, man, I don't want to worry about a secondary resource like this. But in practice, it's very easy to keep it up while killing trash mobs. You'll probably be at full Phoenix Force the entire time, and it's actually pretty easy to keep up during bosses as well. The last thing I want to mention is that you can use all of your other abilities while in the Phoenix form, in addition to Phoenix only abilities. At level 16, you're going to get nearly a 25% boost to all of your damage on all of your skills. This makes the Phoenix Transformation skill essential to every build that Jean has. I highly recommend maxing this skill. Phoenix Avatar is a passive skill which lets you gain Phoenix Force points and Spirit whenever you take damage. With respect to Phoenix Force points, there's some diminishing returns going on here. The first point's probably the best because you get 1 Phoenix Force point, at 3 points you get 2, and at 6 points you finally get 3. I can't imagine a situation where placing 1 point here would be a bad idea. However, if you find yourself not able to manage your Phoenix Force very well, then maybe consider placing 3 points. And of course, during the endgame where you have access to a lot of plus Spirit gear, that percentage-based boost to Spirit's going to be really relevant. The next skill we have here is Phoenix Tempest, and man, this skill is just stupidly powerful. When activated, it creates a massive pulsing ring of fire around your character, dealing massive AoE damage to everything around you. Now I will warn you, this skill isn't for the faint of heart, because while you're doing massive damage, you're going to be in the center of enemies, which means you're going to be taking massive damage as well. One drawback to consider is that this skill will massively deplete your Phoenix Force energy, which means that you can't keep it up all the time, and you will have to kill a lot of enemies to keep your Phoenix Force up. However, because this skill isn't a basic attack or it doesn't consume any spirit, you're free to do whatever you want while this is activated. This means that you can cast all sorts of other skills and abilities at the same time, and this is going to enable you to do the absolute most DPS possible as Jean Grey. If this playstyle doesn't interest you, where you have to constantly manage your secondary resource all the time, then there's certainly other options for Jean Grey, so don't worry. But if you're like me and you like to do a lot of damage and you're a little bit reckless because you rely on player skill a lot more, then I would highly recommend maxing this skill. The last skill in the tree is called Phoenix Charge, and this lets you move in and out of combat very quickly. Because it costs both Spirit and Phoenix Force points, it's not something that you can spam to move around the map faster. However, this is going to allow you to get out of some sticky situations as Jean Grey, and you're going to do some pretty nice damage to boot. It also does some fairly nice damage as you charge into enemies too, and don't forget you can use this ability to kite around bosses, which is pretty much essential later on in the game. My only real complaint with this skill is that it comes far too late at level 16. Like with every character in this game, you need a fast movement skill against the Kingpin, otherwise you're going to be forced to group with other players. Still, regardless of how late it comes, I highly recommend placing a point here. It's a great 1-point wonder. The next skill tree we're going to talk about is Telekinesis, and it doesn't really focus on any particular style of gameplay, it's just a convenient way to group the skills. Jean Grey's basic attack is called Kinetic Bolt, and despite being the first one in the tree, it's actually her best one in my opinion. While the damage is pretty low, it does 2.1 attacks per second, and it also hits all the enemies in a straight line. Surprisingly, this is a pretty good AoE ability, and as an aside, I have to wonder why Hawkeye has to spend an enormous amount of skill points to achieve the same effect, and he only gets it 20 or 25% of the time. Anyway, this is Jean Grey's bread and butter, so you're going to be using this skill quite a bit. Highly recommend maxing this skill. The next basic attack is called Psychic Hammer, and honestly it's not very good. While it does do a little bit more damage per hit, it doesn't pierce through enemies and it has a slower attack speed. The skill is pretty useful against bosses because as you're kiting you won't be able to get a lot of attacks in anyway, so you may as well get the extra damage. Even so, each point applies a 3% damage bonus to Kinetic Bolt, so I'd recommend maxing this as well. Next up we have Kinetic Wave, which is an amazing AoE damage skill which also knocks all the enemies back, making it particularly useful when you find yourself getting swarmed by melee characters, particularly those hand ninjas. In terms of dealing raw AoE damage, this skill represents the highest that Jean Grey has. However, because of the knockback effect, the DPS is actually going to be less than Phoenix Tempest, and it doesn't really play well with that skill either. If you're one of those players that wants to be safe and you don't want to manage the secondary resource that much, then this skill is definitely an option for maxing. One other drawback to this skill is that you can't place the effect wherever you want, it's always around Jean Grey's character. So if you're surrounded by a ton of ranged enemies that are very well spaced out, this skill is going to do very little for you. At the very least, I would consider placing one skill point here because it offers an incredible amount of utility. However, if you're one of those players that doesn't like Phoenix Tempest, then this is one of two available options that you can max into instead. Mental Focus is a passive skill which reduces an enemy's mental defense a certain percentage of the time. Now, I don't think this skill is very good while leveling, but it could be pretty useful during the endgame. For example, if an enemy has 1000 mental defense, then being able to reduce that by say 65% is going to let you do a ton of damage. But if an enemy has 0 mental defense, then this skill is not going to do anything. This leads me to think that it's more of an endgame option as opposed to something for leveling, so I don't recommend placing any extra skill points here. The last skill in the tree is Telekinetic Flight, and this allows Jean Grey to fly over obstacles and move a little bit faster. Since Jean Grey moves pretty fast while in Phoenix form anyway, and she also has the charge ability, I don't see any reason to place any points here. The last skill tree we're going to talk about is Telepathy, and this tree deals with mass AoE crowd control abilities as well as some auras. The first skill in the tree is called Psychic Lethargy, and I gotta be honest with you guys, I'm not really excited about this skill. It does apply a slow debuff to enemies and lets you do a little bit of extra damage, but against trash mobs I'd much rather cast 2 AoE damage skills than cast this and the damage skill because I'm going to do more damage the other way. I'd love to use this skill against enemies with a ton of hit points because then you can really start to maximize the benefit. However, against those enemies it doesn't even seem to work. Unless you're trying to boost a skill like Mind Crush, which you'll get later on in the tree, I don't really recommend placing any points here. Next up is Mind Crush, and man, this skill is just awesome. This is one of Jean Grey's best skills in my opinion. When casting this skill at level 16, it's going to put a giant ring of fire on the ground, and any enemy caught within the ring is going to get stunned for 3 or more seconds, and it's going to do a little bit of damage to boot. While it's true that this skill doesn't do nearly as much damage as something like Kinetic Wave, it does hold the enemies into place, which combos fantastically well with Phoenix Tempest. One of the drawbacks with Phoenix Tempest is that as you're surrounded by a ton of enemies, you're going to be taking some damage, but with Mind Crush it mitigates all of that. Basically, whenever you see a massive pack of enemies, you're going to want to cast Mind Crush, charge in, enable your Phoenix Tempest, and then keep spamming Mind Crush. When the enemies are dead, then turn off the Phoenix Tempest. This is going to enable Jean to do sick, insane, crazy damage, and it's something that Kinetic Wave will never be able to do. Mind Crush is also really nice against ranged enemies too, because you can cast it anywhere on the battlefield. It doesn't have to be where your character is located. I'd highly recommend placing as many points as possible here, and even if you're not going for Phoenix Tempest, I still think it's worth 1 point. Next up are the Aura skills, and they consume a little bit of your maximum spirit for a persistent effect. Bolstering Aura gives your character a little bit of physical and energy defense, but even if you max this skill, it's still worse than 1 point of Cree toughness that Miss Marvel has. This skill is just terrible. I don't recommend picking it. Reinforcing Aura fares much better because it provides a tenacity bonus, which makes it less likely for your character to be inflicted with negative status effects. Since you're going to be kind of strapped for skill points, I'd recommend finding a piece of gear that grants this skill, but you can certainly just place 1 skill point here too. And that does it for our leveling guide for Jean Grey. Hopefully this guide has given you some ideas as to how to best develop Jean Grey for leveling purposes. Overall, I really like how Jean Grey plays because there's this sort of high risk, high reward payoff while playing her. I also want to say that Gazillion has done a great job with all the animations and sound effects concerning Jean Grey and the Phoenix. I do wish that players had the option to sort of tone down the effects though, because they do kind of get in the way of gameplay. And I really wish that Gazillion would give Jean Grey a single target damage skill, something that would just let her solo the content. So what do you guys think of Jean Grey? Do you like the Phoenix forms? Do you like her attack skills? Do you think she's overpowered? Please let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.